Captain Thorne stared at the blinking red light on the console like it had just insulted her mother. "Well, isn't that just fantastic?" she muttered. "The universe is crumbling and we're stuck saving diplomats from a bloody zoo." Beside her, Riggs, the ship's engineer and resident cynic, leaned back in his chair, feet crossed on the console. You'd think they'd at least throw in a few free tickets for all this trouble. But nope, just another day in the glamorous life of mercenaries. "Yeah, glamorous," Thorne repeated, rolling her eyes as she toggled the comms. "All right, crew, listen up. Our job is to bust a diplomat out of this alien zoo before he either becomes part of the exhibit or a snack. Any questions?" Bardock, the weapons specialist with a humor as dark as his past, chimed in over the intercom. "Just one." "How much are we getting paid for babysitting this time?" Thorne glanced at the console, where the contract details flashed. "Enough to keep us flying and maybe buy Riggs a new set of tools so he can stop whining about them." "Ooh, tools," Riggs mocked with a grin. "You sure know how to sweet-talk a guy." "Yeah, well, don't get too excited," Thorne replied. "They probably won't match your charming personality." The ship, affectionately named the Rust Bucket, was anything but glamorous. It groaned like an old man getting out of bed whenever they pushed it too hard. Thorne swore it had a personality, and that personality didn't like them very much. The mission was simple on paper: get in, grab the diplomat, get out. The kind of job that usually ended up being anything but simple, especially when the place they had to infiltrate was a massive alien zoo controlled by the Zithrax Collective, a hive mind of questionable sanity. As they approached the planet, the zoo's glittering dome appeared on the view screen, looking more like a glowing zit on the face of space rather than a place of leisure. "Fancy," muttered Riggs, squinting at the structure. "You think they have souvenir shops? I'd love a t-shirt that says, 'I broke into an alien zoo and all I got was this lousy shirt.'" Thorne snorted. "If we survive, I'll print one for you myself." She punched a few buttons, bringing up schematics of the zoo. "All right, folks, game faces on. This is the part where we pretend we know what we're doing." The crew assembled in the rusty, cramped briefing room, a space barely big enough for their personalities, let alone their bodies. Thorne stood up, tapping the display screen with a finger. "Here's the plan. We park the ship, sneak in, grab the diplomat, and sneak back out before anyone knows we've been there." "Sounds easy," said Bardock, checking his gun with a casualness that suggested he'd done this about 100 times. "So, what's the catch?" "Besides the fact that we're trespassing on a planet run by a hive mind," Thorne replied. "Apparently, the Zithrax Collective is having a bit of a midlife crisis. Reports say it's acting." Weird how?" asked Riggs, fiddling with a spanner. "Like talks to its imaginary friends, weird, or murderous breakdown, weird," added Bardock. Thorne shrugged. "Pick your poison. Either way, let's just say the Zithrax are not known for their customer service." "All right, let's get to it before I start having second thoughts," Riggs said, standing up and stretching. "I hate those." They suited up, strapping on all the gear one might need when breaking into a zoo that could potentially kill you. Thorne led the way to the Rust Bucket's dingy exit hatch. "Remember, folks, silent and sneaky. We're here for a rescue, not a revolution." The airlock opened with a hiss that sounded suspiciously like a sigh, and they stepped out onto the surface of the zoo's planet. The ground was a mix of metal and something that looked like grass but probably wasn't. "Welcome to paradise," Riggs muttered, scanning the horizon. "I've seen worse," Bardock said, cracking his knuckles. "You always say that," Thorne said, checking their coordinates. "And I'm never sure if you're lying or just really unlucky." They moved quickly, using the cover of the artificial landscape to approach the zoo's outer perimeter. The place was eerily quiet, the kind of quiet that suggested someone had forgotten to program in the obligatory chirping aliens. Riggs hacked into the entrance panel with the ease of someone who could probably do it in his sleep. "Welcome, esteemed guests," he mumbled in a mockingly posh accent. "Please enjoy your stay at the Death Trap." The doors slid open to reveal the interior of the zoo, a haphazard mix of cages, enclosures, and habitats that seemed as confused about their purpose as the Zithrax themselves. "Are we sure this isn't some elaborate art installation?" Riggs asked, eyeing a particularly gaudy sculpture that might have been a tree. Bardock chuckled. "If it is, I'd say the artist needs therapy." They moved through the zoo, passing displays of creatures that ranged from the cute and cuddly to the downright terrifying. The Zithrax had a curious definition of exotic wildlife. "You know," Thorn mused, glancing at a creature that looked like a cross between a walrus and a peacock, "if this whole mercenary gig doesn't work out, we could always open our own zoo." "Yeah, right," Riggs snorted. "We'd be bankrupt by lunch." They reached the central control hub, a vast room filled with screens and panels all flickering with data. Or nonsense. Hard to tell which. "Okay, people," Thorn said, focusing on the task. "Let's find our diplomat and get the hell out of Dodge before the Zithrax decide we're the new exhibit." Bardock pulled up the schematics on a nearby screen. "Looks like our guy is in the VIP section. Figures. Probably sipping alien cocktails and relaxing while we're out here doing all the work." "I'd be shocked if it were any other way," Riggs replied, typing commands into the console. "All right, got a lock on his signal. Follow me." They moved deeper into the zoo, passing by enclosures that seemed more haphazard and chaotic the further they went. The Zithrax's weirdness was becoming more apparent, and not in a fun way. "I swear if one of these things jumps out at me, I'm shooting first and asking questions never," Bardock grumbled. "Save your ammo," Thorn said, peering down a shadowy corridor. "We might need it for the grand finale." Finally, they reached the VIP section, a luxurious area that was almost laughably out of place. The diplomat, a man in a suit that screamed, "I'm important," was pacing back and forth, muttering to himself. "You the cavalry?" he asked, spotting them. Thorn nodded. "Yeah, we're the cavalry. Time to go." "Hope you didn't get too comfy," the diplomat sighed in relief. "You have no idea how glad I am to see you. This place is a nightmare." "Yeah, well, nightmares are our specialty," Bardock said, already turning to leave. "Let's move before the Hive mind notices we're stealing their prized possession." They retraced their steps back towards the exit, the diplomat in tow. The zoo's once silent corridors now felt charged with tension, like a ticking bomb. Halfway out, the lights flickered ominously, and a low hum resonated through the walls. Thorn cursed under her breath. "I think we just wore out our welcome." Riggs glanced around nervously. "Sounds like the Zithrax are waking up. Maybe we should have sent a thank you note. How about we just leave them a nice tip and get out of here?" the diplomat suggested, clearly panicking. "Good idea," Thorn said, picking up the pace. "How about we start with not dying?" They were almost at the exit when the hum grew louder, the walls vibrating in time with the sound. The Zithrax collective, it seemed, was less than thrilled with their presence. Just as they reached the outer doors, the control panel sparked and fizzled, the doors slamming shut with a decisive thud. "Oh, perfect," Riggs groaned, yanking a tool from his belt. Because nothing says fun like being trapped by a hive mind having a meltdown. Thorn looked at her crew, then back at the diplomat. "Hang tight. We're not staying for the after party." She turned to Riggs, who was already busy rewiring the panel. "Can you get us out of here? Can a fish swim?" he shot back, his fingers flying over the controls. "Preferably faster than whatever's coming for us," Bardock added, weapon raised. The diplomat swallowed hard, eyes darting between the mercenaries and the flickering lights. "I knew I should have taken that desk job. Next time, don't pick a zoo for a vacation," Thorn said dryly, checking her weapon as the hum rose to a fever pitch. The Zithrax were definitely awake now, and Thorn had the distinct feeling they weren't thrilled about visitors. Riggs gave a triumphant shout as the panel beeped and the doors began to open. "Ladies and gentlemen, your escape route awaits." "About time," Bardock grinned, ushering the diplomat through the opening. "Let's bolt before they change their minds." As they sprinted towards the rust bucket, the zoo's sirens wailed in protest, the Zithrax collective seemingly throwing a cosmic tantrum. They reached the ship, diving inside just as the first of the alarms began to sound. Thorn slammed the hatch closed and raced to the cockpit. "All right, Rust Bucket, let's see what you can do," she muttered, firing up the engines. The ship roared to life, lifting off the ground with a shudder. They shot off into space with the zoo shrinking behind them, the planet rapidly becoming a speck in the distance. "Well, that was fun," Riggs said, leaning back in his seat with a satisfied grin. Thorn shot him a look. "Define fun," Bardock chuckled, setting his gun aside. "Let's just say it beats doing paperwork." As they settled into the cockpit, the diplomat sank into a chair, relief etched on his face. "I owe you my life," he said, his voice still shaky. "Yeah, you do," Thorn replied, scanning the console for any signs of pursuit. "But for now, let's just focus on staying alive. We've got a long flight ahead." The Rust Bucket hummed along, carrying them away from the chaos and into the uncertain vastness of space. Thorn leaned back, glancing at her crew. "All right, who wants to bet how long before something else goes wrong?" Riggs and Bardock exchanged looks. 5 minutes tops, they said in unison. Vast space sprawled before them, a dangerous highway of stars and shadows. Humanity's eternal playground, and sometimes its most brutal battleground. "Time to see what's next on the list of things trying to kill us," Thorn mused, staring into the void. As the Rust Bucket drifted through the void, Captain Thorn was half convinced it might actually be a rusty bucket. The ship's dashboard blinked with more warning lights than a poorly decorated Christmas tree. But that was par for the course in her line of work. It was never about whether something would go wrong, only about when. "So, what's the plan once we touch down at the zoo?" Bardock asked from the back, his voice tinged with a mix of boredom and anticipation. "Besides dodging the homicidal tendencies of a hive mind having a midlife crisis, of course." "Oh, you know the usual," Thorn replied, keeping her eyes on the dismal star field ahead. "We break in, find the diplomat, casually dodge any attempts on our lives, then break out." "Simple, simple," Riggs echoed, leaning over his console with the air of a man trying to fix a toaster with duct tape and obscenities. "Like disarming a bomb with a spork," Thorn smirked. "Exactly the kind of optimism I need." "Keep it up, Riggs." The diplomat let out a nervous laugh, clearly not used to this level of casual fatalism. "You guys do this often, only when we're bored." Bardock grinned, checking his weapon as if it were his favorite pet. "Or broke. Mostly broke," Thorn added. "But don't worry, you're not the first guy we've pulled out of a tight spot. Though, you might want to update your will just in case." They descended toward the zoo planet again, the sprawling containment fields shimmering like heat haze over a desert of bad intentions. The planet itself looked deceptively welcoming, the kind of place you take a family photo, only to find out later it was the backdrop for a cosmic horror flick. "All systems go?" Thorn asked, more out of habit than hope. "Define go," Riggs replied, tapping yet another blinking light. "If you mean ready to fall apart at a moment's notice, then yeah, we're solid, good enough for me," Thorn muttered, engaging the landing sequence. The Rust Bucket touched down with a lurch that suggested the landing gear had seen better days. The crew gathered at the exit hatch, each checking their gear one last time. "Remember," Thorn said, looking at her motley crew, "silent and sneaky. We want to be in and out before the Zithrax even realize we were here." "Like a bad date," Bardock quipped. "Quick, awkward, and regrettable." The diplomat chuckled nervously. "I'm really starting to regret not taking that desk job." "It's never too late to make poor life choices," Riggs offered, patting him on the back with probably more force than necessary. The hatch opened with a faint groan, and they stepped onto the surface of the zoo planet once again. The artificial landscape was disturbingly quiet, as if even the sound waves were too scared to make a fuss. They moved quickly, the shadows of cage bars casting long, finger-like shapes across the ground. The zoo was a maze of tangled enclosures, each housing a different species, each as weird and wonderful as the last. "If it weren't for the whole, murderous hive mind thing, this place would make a killing as a tourist trap," Riggs mused, eyes flicking toward a pen filled with what looked like luminous jellyfish floating through a thick, gaseous substance. Just needs a gift shop and a few overpriced snacks, Bardock agreed, peering into an enclosure that sported a bizarre, spiky creature. It blinked at him with far too many eyes. They crept past more cages, some empty, some filled with creatures that defied description. The Zithrax had gathered life forms from across the galaxy, like the world's most bizarre petting zoo, except petting might result in dismemberment. Eventually, they reached the central hub, the heart of the zoo's operations. Or as Bardock put it, the place where the fun happens. Looks like the Zithrax are really running on fumes, Thorn commented, watching a screen that flashed erratically, as if it couldn't make up its mind about whether it wanted to display data or just static. Yeah, Riggs said, tapping a console and eliciting a shower of sparks for his trouble. Either that or they've finally discovered existential dread. Lucky them, Thorn said, rifling through the mess of wires and panels. Let's find out what's really going on here. It didn't take long for the answer to present itself. The Zithrax Collective was indeed having a meltdown, and it wasn't the kind you'd fix with a few therapy sessions. The Hive mind was splintering, its once unified consciousness now a jumbled mess of conflicting directives. Looks like their collective consciousness has taken a dive into the deep end, Riggs noted, pulling up a stream of jumbled data. Conflicting commands, system errors. It's like watching a bureaucratic nightmare unfold in real time. Great, Bardock said, rolling his eyes. Nothing like being caught in the crossfire of a hive mind's identity crisis. It explains the weirdness, Thorn agreed. The creatures acting strange, the systems going haywire. It's all connected. The diplomat, who had been quiet for a while, piped up, so, what does this mean for us? It means we need to get out of here before the whole place goes up in flames, Thorn replied, already moving toward the exit. The more the hive mind fractures, the more dangerous it becomes. We need to get you back to the rust bucket and off this rock. They retraced their steps through the zoo, the tension in the air thick enough to cut with a knife. The once still corridors now echoed with distant sounds, alarms, the shuffle of unseen creatures, the dull hum of the failing systems. Feels like the planet's about to throw a tantrum, Riggs muttered, his finger hovering over his weapon's safety. Can't blame it, Bardock said. I'm about ready to throw one myself. As they approached the exit, the lights flickered, casting long shadows that danced across the floor. The zoo seemed to be in its death throes, the once proud monument to the Zithrax's control now a crumbling relic of chaos. But just as they reached the exit, a figure stepped into their path, blocking the way with an air of authority that clashed with the ragged, panicked look in his eyes. It was a Zithrax, or what was left of one, a drone visibly shaking, as if caught between a command and an impulse to run screaming into the void. Thorn raised a hand, signaling the others to hold their fire. Easy there, we're just passing through. No need to make this any messier than it already is. The Zithrax drone tilted its head, its gaze flickering between awareness and confusion. You cannot leave, it said, its voice a choppy, distorted version of what had probably once been a commanding presence. The zoo. It is not safe. No kidding, Bardock said. That's why we're on our way out. So if you don't mind, the collective. The drone's voice warbled, its body jerking with spasms. It is. Lost we cannot. Control. That makes two of us, Riggs quipped. Now are you gonna let us pass, or are we gonna have to make this awkward? The drone hesitated, its eyes flickering like faulty light bulbs before stepping aside with a jerky, uncertain motion. Go, it said, its voice a mere whisper. Before it ends, you don't have to tell us twice, Thorn said, motioning for her crew to move. They slipped past the drone, who remained standing there, a sad, broken figure amid the madness. Thorn couldn't help but feel a flicker of pity. Even a hive mind deserved a break every now and then. They burst from the exit, the rust bucket looming before them like a promise of escape. Alarms wailed around them, the planet itself seeming to shudder under the strain of the failing hive mind. Quickly, quickly, the diplomat urged, his voice tinged with barely controlled panic. They piled into the ship, Thorn slamming the hatch closed behind them. She raced to the cockpit, punching in the launch sequence with a speed born of desperation. "Rust bucket, don't fail me now," she muttered, coaxing the engines to life. The ship lifted off, the zoo planet shrinking behind them, its glowing containment fields flickering like a dying ember. As they soared into the void, the crew let out a collective sigh of relief. "Well, that was a day out, wasn't it?" Bardock said, settling into his seat with a grin. "I don't know about you, but I've had enough excitement for one lifetime," Riggs added, slumping back as if the very act of sitting was a luxury. The diplomat, still pale, managed a shaky smile. "I can't thank you enough for getting me out of there." "Don't thank us yet," Thorne replied, scanning the console for any signs of pursuit. "We're not out of the woods until we're well clear of this sector." The rust bucket hummed along, carrying them away from the chaos and into the uncertain vastness of space. Thorne leaned back, allowing herself a rare moment of respite. "All right, who wants to bet how long before something else tries to kill us?" she asked, a hint of a grin tugging at her lips. Bardock and Riggs looked at each other, then back at her. "5 minutes tops," they said in unison, laughter threading through their words like a thin, resilient wire. The void stretched before them, vast and unknowable, a dangerous playground where dreams and nightmares danced hand in hand. For a moment all was still, save for the gentle hum of the rust bucket's engines. Then, as if on cue, a distant blip appeared on the radar, and Thorne's smirk widened. "Looks like we've got company," she said, hands flying over the controls. "And here I thought we might actually get some rest," Riggs sighed, though the spark in his eyes suggested he wouldn't have it any other way. "Rest is for the dead," Bardock agreed, already checking his weapons with the air of a man preparing for a dance he knew all too well. As the rust bucket veered toward the new threat, Thorne couldn't help but feel a thrill of anticipation. After all, in a universe where survival was never guaranteed, a good fight was sometimes the closest thing to certainty you could get. And with that thought, they plunged back into the fray, ready for whatever the stars and life threw their way next. Captain Thorne slouched back in her chair, eyeballing the blinking LED display on the console. It was a comforting sight, like an old friend reminding you that you were still alive, albeit barely. The rust bucket wasn't named for her sleek lines and state-of-the-art tech, that was for sure. "Let's see what we're dealing with," she muttered, fingers dancing over the screen with practiced ease. The console spat out a jumble of alerts and error messages, a symphony of dysfunction. Riggs appeared over her shoulder, chewing on a bit of cable. "Looks like the planet's gone full apocalypse. Security systems are thinking they're zoo exhibits." "Charming. Any chance of fixing the mess?" Thorne asked, though she already knew the answer. In their line of work, optimism was just a fancy word for not paying attention. Riggs grinned, displaying an alarming number of fillings. "Well, if by fix you mean pray it doesn't explode in our faces, then sure." Bardock, perched on a nearby crate, snorted. "Great. So what's the plan, Captain? Wait it out and hope diplomacy works." Thorne chuckled darkly. "Diplomacy? With a hive mind having a midlife crisis? No, thanks. We're going to the zoo's central control node. Stabilize the hive mind, or at least unplug whatever's making it lose its marbles." The diplomat, who still looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, piped up. "Isn't that a bit dangerous?" "Absolutely," Thorne replied, smirking. "But if you wanted safe, you should have stuck to intergalactic tax law." They geared up, each member of the crew slipping into their roles with the ease of a favorite jacket. Bardock checked his arsenal, a gleam in his eye suggesting he'd already named half his weapons and was considering marriage to the other half. Riggs pocketed every tool and gadget he could carry, like a magpie with a penchant for duct tape. Stepping out of the rust bucket, the atmosphere hung heavy with the promise of imminent disaster. The zoo planet's sky was a sickly green, like it couldn't decide whether to rain acid or just implode. "Right," Thorne said, squinting at the path ahead. "Let's try not to die on our way to the control node. I'd hate to disappoint the Reaper by being early." Cautious steps took them back into the zoo's labyrinthine corridors. The cages, some shattered, others eerily empty, added to the tension. a claustrophobic reminder of the chaos lurking just beneath the surface. Rounding a corner, they stumbled into a scene straight out of a nightmare. The zoo's automated defenses were having a fit, lasers crisscrossing the air like a toddler on a sugar high with a crayon. Riggs whistled low. Lasers and vents, classic combo for a barbecued crew. "Think we can sneak through?" the diplomat asked, his voice barely above a whisper, as if afraid to wake the sleeping beast. "Only one way to find out," Bardock said, grinning like a kid about to steal from the cookie jar. Thorn watched the chaotic dance of light, calculating their chances of getting through without anyone ending up extra crispy. "All right, when I say go, run like you owe the universe a favor." The crew tensed, muscles coiled like tightly wound springs. "Go!" Thorn barked, and they bolted. They zigzagged through the laser grid, hearts pounding in synchrony with the erratic flashes. Thorn felt the heat of a near-miss sizzle past her ear, the air smelling faintly of ozone and panic. Miraculously, they burst through to the other side, breathless but intact. "Well, that was invigorating," Riggs huffed, patting down his singed uniform. "I should have worn my running shoes." Thorn grinned, adrenaline still thrumming through her veins. "A little cardio never hurt anyone, right?" They pressed on, the alien landscape around them shifting with every step. The zoo seemed to defy logic, a maze designed by someone who thought gravity was optional and logic was for suckers. Finally, they reached the central hub, an imposing structure bristling with tech. It hummed ominously like a sleeping dragon with heartburn. "All right, let's poke the dragon," Thorn said, approaching the control panel. Her fingers skimmed over the buttons, triggering a flood of data that painted a picture more jumbled than an artist's fever dream. Riggs leaned in, eyes scanning the mess. "Looks like the Hive mind's stuck in a loop. It's trying to follow orders that don't make sense. We need to reboot it." "Like turning it off and on again?" the diplomat asked, skepticism painted across his face. "Exactly," Riggs replied, deadpan. "Except this time screwing up might lead to, the destruction of a small moon." Thorn sighed, glancing at the fractured data stream. "Okay, we do this the old-fashioned way." "I'll handle the reboot, Riggs, you keep the system stable. Bardock, keep an eye out for any surprises." They set to work, the air thick with tension and the faint whir of systems struggling to comply. The console blinked like a strobe light at an underfunded rave, each flicker a heart-stopping moment of uncertainty. "Any minute now," Riggs grunted, adjusting a wire with all the delicate grace of a blacksmith performing brain surgery. Thorn nodded, her focus laser-sharp. The zoo's network was a tangled mess, a digital Gordian knot with a penchant for melodrama. Suddenly, alarms blared, the once quiet corridors erupting with a cacophony of sound. The lights flickered wildly, casting eerie shadows that danced across the walls like ghosts caught in a disco. "Looks like the welcoming committee has arrived," Bardock announced, weapon at the ready. The sound of scuttling feet and mechanical whirs echoed ominously from the depths. "Great," Thorn muttered, eyes never leaving the console. Just what we needed, a pep rally. A menagerie of malfunctioning drones and escaped zoo creatures shambled into view. They moved with the jerky awkwardness of marionettes whose puppeteer was several drinks past sober. "I guess this means they want to play," Bardock said, a wry grin splitting his face as he raised his weapon. "Don't get too carried away," Thorn called over her shoulder, fingers flying across the console. "I'd hate to have to explain to the boss why we lost our security deposit on this mission." Bardock chuckled, opening fire with the precision of a maestro conducting a symphony of chaos. Beams of energy sliced through the air, each shot met with a burst of sparks and a satisfying thud as another drone bit the dust. As Bardock and Riggs held the line, Thorn worked her magic on the console. The data stream began to stabilize, the erratic pulses smoothing into something resembling coherence. "Almost there," she muttered, ignoring the roar of combat around her. The hive mind's fractured consciousness was piecing itself back together, the chaos receding like a bad hangover. A particularly persistent drone lunged at Riggs, its metallic claws swiping through the air with lethal intent. Riggs sidestepped, sending it crashing into a wall with a well-placed kick. Ever feel like the universe is just trying to kill us for kicks? He grinned, wiping sweat from his brow. Every damn day, Bardock replied, still grinning like a madman. With a final flourish, Thorn hit the reboot command. The console dimmed, then blinked back to life with a calm, steady glow. "Did it work?" the diplomat asked, peering at the screen like a man hoping to see his lottery numbers pop up. "Looks like it," Thorn said, relief washing over her like a cool breeze. "The Hive mine's back online and the zoo's systems are stabilizing." The remaining drones staggered, their aggression faltering as the new directives took hold. The zoo creatures, now docile, retreated to their enclosures, leaving a sudden, eerie silence in their wake. "Nicely done," Bardock said, lowering his weapon with a satisfied nod. "I was getting tired of shooting anyway." Riggs chuckled, his smile wide and unabashed. Another day, another narrowly averted disaster. The diplomat exhaled a long-held breath, his shoulders sagging with relief. "I suppose I owe you all an apology. I thought you were just a bunch of reckless renegades." Thorn laughed, shaking her head. "Nah, we're just the universe's most stubborn problem solvers." With the zoo's systems back under control, they started their trek back to the rust bucket. As they walked, Thorn couldn't help but feel a flicker of pride. They'd faced down a fractured hive mind, malfunctioning security and a menagerie of alien nightmares, and still walked away with all their limbs intact. "You know," she said, glancing at her ragtag crew, "for a bunch of misfits, we're pretty damn good at this." Bardock smirked, adjusting his weapon. "What can I say? We thrive under pressure." Riggs nodded, a gleam in his eye that spoke of more than a few stories yet to be told. "Here's to our next adventure. May it be just as exciting and twice as insane." As they climbed aboard the rust bucket, the ship's familiar hum greeted them like a warm embrace. Thorn settled into her chair, the weight of the mission finally lifting off her shoulders. "And who knows," she mused, a wry grin tugging at her lips. "Maybe next time we'll actually get a day off." The crew laughed, a sound full of camaraderie and shared triumph. For now they were safe, and the universe's chaos had been held at bay. But in the far reaches of space, the stars glittered with untold possibilities and lurking dangers. Whatever came next, Thorn and her crew would be ready, armed with quick wits, sharp tongues, and a shared belief that when life threw chaos their way, they'd meet it with a grin and a well-aimed shot. And somewhere out there, the universe chuckled, already planning their next encounter with fate, folly, and the strange dance of destiny that kept them all on their toes. Thorn leaned back in her chair, the rust bucket's console displaying the mesmerizing chaos of their recent hack job. "So, a successful mission, right?" she said, feigning nonchalance. "Nobody died, the ship didn't explode, and the universe didn't implode. Almost a record for us." Riggs, occupying a nearby seat and fiddling nervously with a multitool, snorted. "Wouldn't call it a success until we're off this rock and counting our pay." "Curse of the optimist," Bardock chimed in, still savoring the afterglow of their skirmish with the zoo drones. "You know how this goes. If it's going well, wait 5 minutes." They had spent long enough in this line of work to know that hope was a trapped delusion dangled before you just to watch you trip over yourself. Thorn shook off the feeling with an exaggerated yawn. "All right, enough philosophy. Let's chat with our diplomat friend and see if he's ready to leave this zoo behind." The diplomat, a man whose demeanor was as tightly wound as his suit, appeared in the doorway. He looked around the bridge with the air of a high school principal inspecting the scene of a food fight. "Is it safe to assume we're done with the excitement for today?" Thorn gave him a smile sharp enough to cut steel. "You make it sound like we had a choice in the matter." He cleared his throat, adjusting his cuffs like they were the only thing holding his composure together. "I do believe I owe you an apology," he said, with all the sincerity of a politician at a campaign rally. "Your methods, unconventional as they are, proved effective." "You hear that, guys? We're officially unconventional," Riggs said, grinning. "Beats the hell out of being called reckless." "Or suicidal," Bardock added, casually loading another magazine into his weapon. The diplomat, for all his formal bluster, had the good sense to look sheepish. Considering the circumstances, I can't complain. Thorn stood, stretching her legs, and gestured to the console. Speaking of circumstances, I had a little peek at what's been going on with our friends, the Zithrax Collective. Riggs raised an eyebrow. And it seems, Thorn continued, that our very presence here has given them a taste of something they weren't quite prepared for: human emotions. The diplomat frowned, his carefully constructed poise slipping. I'm sorry, are you suggesting we've infected them? Not so much infected them as given them a crash course in the highlights and lowlights of the human experience, Thorn replied. And let me tell you, it's not pretty, Bardock chuckled, an edge of disbelief in his voice. So what, they're having an existential crisis? More like a civil war, Thorn said, with the same enthusiasm one might reserve for announcing a particularly grim weather forecast. Parts of the hive mind are freaking out, going all destroy the humans on us. Riggs looked up, eyes wide with intrigue. You mean to say we've somehow managed to give a hive mind a personality disorder? That's new. Isn't it just? Thorn agreed, her gaze flicking back to the console screen, which displayed a dizzying array of data and alerts. Seems the Zithrax weren't built to handle the full human emotional spectrum. Who'd have thought we'd be too much for a race of super-intelligent aliens? The diplomat's voice had taken on an edge of panic. If they are truly fracturing, it could mean that they are unpredictable, dangerous, and likely to do anything from here on out, Thorn finished for him, turning to face her crew. Sound familiar? Like looking in a damn mirror, Riggs said, a wry smile curling his lips. Except this mirror has lasers. Thorn clapped her hands, bringing the focus back to the matter at hand. All right, people, we've got a choice. Either we leave now while the hive mind is busy arguing with itself, or we stick around and see how this intergalactic therapy session pans out. Option A sounds tempting, Bardock said. But then again, I'm curious. What do you think, Captain? Thorn weighed their options, her fingers drumming a thoughtful rhythm against the console. Curiosity killed the cat, but satisfaction brought it back, right? The diplomat, looking increasingly like a man who regretted every decision that led him here, stammered. Are we seriously considering staying? Riggs shrugged, a mischievous glint in his eye. Think of it as a learning experience. How often do you get to witness a hive mind meltdown without paying for it? With a resigned sigh, the diplomat nodded. If we're playing the part of the universe's guinea pigs, I suppose we might as well get used to it. Thorn smirked, her gaze sweeping over her crew. All right, misfits, let's give this hive mind a little more to chew on. Maybe, just maybe, we can turn this into something profitable. Riggs adjusted his tool belt, ready for anything. You had me at profitable. Bardock, a twinkle of chaos in his eye, was already checking his ammo. And I thought this day couldn't get any better. The diplomat, resigned to whatever madness lay ahead, simply nodded. Lead on, Captain. Let's see what havoc we can wreak. As the rust bucket powered down beneath the alien sky, the team moved out, striding through the zoo's corridors with the confidence of people who had survived worse, or at least, people who had convinced themselves of it. The zoo was eerily quiet now, the calm after a particularly violent storm. The creatures, once restless and agitated, were now subdued, as if sensing the disarray in their overlord's control. Why is it that space feels bigger when the lights go out? Riggs wondered aloud, eyeing the shadows with suspicion. It's not the space, Bardock replied, scanning the passageways with practiced ease. It's the silence. You get used to the noise, and when it stops, that's when things go sideways. The diplomat, trailing a pace behind, muttered, I preferred it when the danger was up front. Thorn led them toward a central node, a place where the hive mind's influence was strongest. All right, everyone, keep your eyes peeled. If this thing's truly fracturing, we might encounter some resistance. Riggs grinned, an irrepressible optimist despite himself. Resistance? In this line of work? I'm shocked. The passage widened, opening into a vast chamber filled with pulsating, organic structures that glowed with an eerie, sickly light. It was like stepping into the belly of a beast having an identity crisis. "Well," Bardock said, taking in the scene, "if this isn't an open invitation, I don't know what is." The air crackled with an unnatural energy, the sensation of being watched palpable, like a bad hangover you couldn't shake. Thorn approached a central console, its surface a chaotic mess of lights and symbols, as if the interface itself had decided now was the perfect time for a nervous breakdown. "All right, let's see what happens when we poke the hornet's nest," Thorn said, fingers dancing over the controls. "Riggs, Bardock, keep an eye out for any disgruntled locals." The console flickered to life, displaying fragmented bits of data, memories, thoughts, sensations scattered like the remnants of a particularly nasty breakup. Thorn sifted through the chaos, piecing together the Hive mind's mental state. "Looks like our presence has stirred up some factions," she reported, reading through the data. "There's one thinking we're a threat, another that wants to study us, and a third that's just having a full-blown emotional meltdown." Riggs chuckled, shaking his head. "Sounds like a typical family reunion." The diplomat, peering over Thorn's shoulder, frowned. "And what's our role in this drama?" "Unwilling protagonists," Thorn replied, a hint of amusement in her voice. "But hey, at least we're not bored, right?" A rumble echoed through the chamber, a low, ominous growl that vibrated through the floor like the precursor to a bad decision. The organic structures pulsed, shadows shifting like they were alive and hungry. "Looks like someone's decided to make things interesting," Bardock said, raising his weapon. "I was starting to worry we'd be leaving without a goodbye party." Thorn, undeterred, continued her work at the console. "All right, let's see if we can't persuade these factions to play nice, or at least ignore us long enough to make a clean getaway." With deft fingers, she manipulated the Hive mind's fragmented consciousness, sending out a signal, a digital olive branch wrapped in just enough human guile to keep things lively. "That should keep them occupied," Thorn said, stepping back from the console as the entity's attention shifted, its focus splintering elsewhere. Riggs clapped a hand on her shoulder, a grin splitting his face. "You sure know how to stir the pot, Captain." "Practice makes perfect," Thorn replied, motioning for the team to move. "Now let's get out of here before they change their minds." As they made their way back through the zoo's winding corridors, the air felt charged with something akin to victory, a fleeting moment of triumph in their chaotic existence. "Think they'll remember us?" Bardock asked, his pace slow and deliberate as they neared the rust bucket. "Maybe," Thorn said, her voice light with humor. "But by the time they do, we'll be long gone and someone else's problem." The diplomat, trailing behind, managed a smile of his own. "It's not exactly how I imagined this mission would go, but thank you." Thorn laughed, a sound that echoed through the ship's hull as they boarded. "Oh, don't thank us yet. We might have saved the day, but there's always tomorrow to screw it all up again." With that, the rust bucket powered up, engines humming to life as they prepared to leave the zoo planet behind. The crew settled into their stations, the weight of the mission starting to lift as they left the madness in their rear view. "And here I was thinking we'd be bored," Riggs said, a smirk tugging at his lips. Bardock chuckled, settling into his seat with a sigh of satisfaction. "On this crew, not a chance." As the rust bucket soared into the stars, Thorn felt the familiar thrill of adventure pulse through her. Whatever chaos lay ahead, they'd face it with the same tenacity and dark humor that had brought them this far. After all, in a universe as twisted and unpredictable as theirs, you either laughed in the face of danger or cried into your synth whiskey. And frankly, Thorn preferred the laughter. The rust bucket hummed like a hyperactive wasp on its worst day as it dodged laser fire from the rogue Zithrax. It was like a thrilling dance through a blender set on Obliterate, and Captain Thorn couldn't help but enjoy the familiar chaos, even if it was rapidly disintegrating into a cluster of catastrophic proportions. "Everyone still in one piece," Thorn shouted over the din, already knowing the answer was probably a resounding no. Riggs was fiddling with his multitool like it was a rosary, and he was about to meet his maker. "Define one piece, Captain. Pretty sure my nerves are in shards." Bardock, ever the optimist in the face of impending doom, was crouched beside the ship's main console, fiddling with a large cable. "Hey, Riggs, if you find a way to keep this thing from exploding, let me know. Might be useful." The diplomat, who had the misfortune of being stuck with them, looked like someone had told him the universe was out of tea. "This is not quite what I envisioned when I signed up for a diplomatic mission." "Stick around, it gets worse," Thorn quipped, giving the man a wink that mixed reassurance with resignation. She pulled a sharp turn, narrowly avoiding a beam that would have turned them into space dust. Then the inevitable happened. Communications went down faster than a drunk on wet stairs. The bridge flickered, and the screen that had been their window to the outside chaos went black, leaving them with nothing but the harsh, irregular pulse of emergency lighting. Bardock swore, a colorful blend of curses that would have made a sailor blush. "Well, this is cozy. Just what we needed," Riggs said, his voice dripping sarcasm. "A little quality time with each other in the dark." Thorn sighed, a sound that melded with the creaking of the ship. "Right, folks, we're officially blind. Let's not panic just yet." She glanced around the dimly lit cabin, trying to gauge the crew's readiness for a contingency plan. They looked like a bunch of misfit marionettes, dangling on the strings of fate. If it wasn't so dire, it might have been comical. "Here's the plan," Thorn continued, her voice carrying the calm of a captain who had seen more than a fair share of near-death scenarios. "We find each other, we regroup, and we give those Zithraks something else to worry about." The diplomat opened his mouth as if to protest, then closed it with a snap, a man resigned to surviving in the company of lunatics. Thorn noted his silence with approval. At least he'd learned one thing, when to shut up and follow orders. Riggs managed a shaky grin. "No pressure, then." Bardock slapped a hand on Riggs' back. "Just another day at the office, pal." They descended from the bridge, the rustbucket's corridors lit by intermittent sparks like a malfunctioning disco. Thorn took point, her instincts honed by years of surviving the universe's cruel sense of humor. As they moved deeper into the ship, the silence pressed in, a tangible force that made every footstep echo like a gunshot. They hit the first junction, a split that would send them to opposite ends of the ship. "All right," Thorn commanded. "Split up, do what you can. Get us back up and running, and for the love of cosmic irony, try not to die." Bardock gave her a jaunty salute, the kind a soldier might give before charging into the maw of hell. "See you on the flip side, Captain." Riggs was less enthusiastic. "Great. Separate in a crisis." What could possibly go wrong? The diplomat, sandwiched between indecision and fear, simply nodded, sticking close to Thorn like a shadow that had forgotten its purpose. "I'll stay with you," he said, unnecessarily stating the obvious. "Good choice," Thorn replied, motioning for Riggs and Bardock to head off in opposite directions. She was left with the diplomat, who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else but was stuck between a rock and a hard vacuum. The two of them made their way toward the engineering bay, the heart of the Rust Bucket's operations. If they could get anything working, it would be from there. The path was littered with debris, the ship's innards exposed like a wounded beast. Every flicker of light revealed new horrors, the kind that made you wonder why you hadn't chosen a nice, safe career in accountancy. They reached the bay, Thorn eyeing the mess of cables and loose panels with the practiced disdain of someone who'd spent more time fixing things with duct tape than was healthy. "Well, this is a disaster waiting to happen," she said, stepping over a particularly precarious tangle of wires. "Let's hope it's more waiting than happening." "Do you do this often?" the diplomat asked, his voice a mixture of awe and disbelief. Thorn glanced at him, her eyes glinting in the half-light. "You get used to it, or you die. Not much middle ground out here." She set to work, deft fingers moving over the console like a pianist coaxing a symphony from a broken keyboard. The diplomat watched, trying not to look too impressed, failing miserably. "Ever wonder why we do this?" he asked, trying to fill the silence with anything other than the sound of their impending doom. Every damn day, Thorn replied, rerouting power like a magician pulling rabbits from a hat. But then I remember I hate admin work, and here we are. The console flickered, a sputter of life that encouraged her to keep going. If they could just get one system online, they might have a fighting chance. The universe had a way of laughing in your face, but Thorn was nothing if not persistent. As the minutes dragged on, the Rust Bucket systems began to grudgingly respond. It was like coaxing an old drunk to get out of bed, slow, argumentative, and prone to sudden fits of stubbornness. "Come on, you piece of junk," Thorn muttered, hitting the console with more force than was strictly necessary. It let out a mournful beep but dutifully complied, flicking on the internal comms. "Riggs," Thorn called, the sound crackling through the speakers. "Bardock, anyone alive out there?" Silence. Then the faint, static-laden voice of Riggs broke through. "Barely. Found the short circuit. Fixing it with spit and prayer." Bardock's chuckle followed, a comforting sound in the sea of static. "Don't forget the duct tape, Riggs, key ingredient." Thorn couldn't help but smile. "Just keep breathing, boys, we'll get through this yet." With the comms patched, she turned her attention back to the control systems. If they could get the engines running, they might just limp out of this mess in one piece, metaphorically speaking, of course. The diplomat watched her work with a sense of growing admiration. "You've really done this before, haven't you?" "Too many times to count," Thorn said, her focus on the maze of circuits before her. "But here's the thing. The universe is like a bad ex. Just when you think you've got it figured out, it throws a curveball." The diplomat blanched at the analogy, clearly not enjoying the idea of the universe as a petulant lover. "You certainly have a way with words. And you have a way with looking like you're about to vomit," Thorn replied, not unkindly. "Just keep your breakfast down until we're out of here, yeah?" They worked in tandem, the diplomat handing her tools and keeping an eye on the readouts. It was a rhythm born of necessity, one that Thorn found oddly comforting in its predictability. "Thorn here," she called into the comms, hoping for good news. "How are we doing?" Riggs' voice came back, muffled but understandable. "Think I've got the worst of it patched up. Might not hold for long, though." Bardock chimed in, his tone as dry as ever. "Good enough for a quick getaway, assuming we don't explode first." "Always the optimist, Bardock," Thorn said, her lips twitching into a weary smile. "All right, let's prep for departure." With the engines grudgingly coaxed back to life, the Rust Bucket was a limping beast, more scrap than ship. But it was their scrap, and Thorn had a fierce loyalty to anything that defied the odds. They made their way back to the bridge, reuniting with Riggs and Bardock amidst the sparking chaos. The crew, such as it was, regrouped with the kind of camaraderie that only came from shared brushes with death. "Well," Riggs said, wiping sweat from his brow, "that was fun." Bardock nodded, his weapon slung casually over his shoulder. "Next time, let's take a vacation instead." The diplomat, looking less like a man on the edge of a breakdown, managed a smile. "I think I'll stick to my day job after this." Thorn surveyed the ragtag group, feeling a swell of something akin to pride. They'd survived another round, and in their line of work, that was as close to a win as you got. "All right," she said, settling into her seat with a sigh. "Let's get out of here before anyone changes their mind." The Rust Bucket, held together by hope and haphazard repairs, shuddered as it lifted off, carrying them away from the chaos of the zoo planet and back into the uncertain embrace of space. And as they soared into the void, Thorn felt the familiar pull of adventure, the knowledge that no matter what, they'd face it together with the same irreverent humor and reckless determination that had brought them this far. In a universe full of surprises, that was all you could really hope for. The Rust Bucket limped through space like a drunk that's just realized the bar's closed and he's got no ride home. Inside, the crew was reuniting in the ship's control node, a place where wires hung loose like bad haircuts, and the air smelled faintly of singed circuits and burnt coffee. Captain Thorn rubbed her temples, trying to massage away the headache that came from babysitting the universe's most dysfunctional daycare. Bardock was already tinkering with the console, his fingers dancing over the keys like he was playing a game of which one of these buttons won't kill us. Beside him, Riggs was busy wrapping duct tape around a bundle of wires, the multitool clutched in his teeth like a pirate with a dagger. "At least the view's nice," Bardock quipped, nodding towards the window showing a galaxy that cared about them as much as a cat cares about a mouse. "Yeah, if you're into firework displays made of impending doom," Riggs replied, spitting out the multitool and giving the tape one last tug. "They're good as new. Or at least as good as it's gonna get." Thorne surveyed her crew, a ragtag bunch of misfits who'd somehow made incompetence an asset. "All right, let's see if we can stop this heap from disintegrating before we hit a space cow." The diplomat, who had somehow managed to keep his breakfast down, piped up. "Is it always this chaotic?" Thorne shot him a glance that spoke volumes, most of them unprintable. "Chaos is the natural state of the universe. We just enhance it." Just as Thorne was about to lay out the next part of their rapidly degrading plan, a series of angry red lights flashed across the console. Bardock's eyes lit up with the kind of excitement usually reserved for lottery winners or lunatics. "Looks like the Zithrax are having a little civil war. Their systems are fragmenting." "Great," Thorne said dryly. "A zoo planet civil war, just what we needed, more fireworks." "Maybe they'll kill each other before we get there," Riggs suggested hopefully. "Or maybe they'll just be more inclined to shoot us on sight," Bardock countered, always the ray of sunshine. The diplomat shifted uncomfortably, like a man who'd just realized he'd bought a one-way ticket to Disaster Town. "Is there any way to communicate with them? Calm them down." "Calm them down," Thorne raised an eyebrow. "Do you see a therapist on board? Because last I checked, they're not big on rational conversation." But something about the diplomat's suggestion burrowed into Thorne's brain like a tick, gnawing away. The Zithrax weren't responding to the usual stimuli, violence, threats, or bribery. Maybe it was time to try something different. "All right, humor me for a minute," Thorne said, leaning over the console. "Let's assume for a second that these Zithrax are more than just trigger-happy maniacs. What if they're, I don't know, having a collective emotional crisis?" Riggs snorted. "Aliens with their feelings hurt." "What's next, space hugs?" But Thorne wasn't laughing. She tapped at the console, bringing up a garbled readout of the Zithrax's system. It was a mess of conflicting signals, like a breakup set to music. "Look, maybe we're going about this all wrong. What if we need to talk to them in a way they understand?" Bardock shrugged. "We've tried shouting, waving, and shooting. What's left? Interpretive dance." "Emotions," Thorne said. "Maybe we need to show them what we're feeling, empathize or whatever." The diplomat's eyes widened. "Are you suggesting we emotionally communicate with them?" "Yeah, unless you've got a better plan," Thorne replied, not that she expected one. "We can't punch our way out of this one." "Let's try a little human touch." Riggs looked skeptical but intrigued, like he'd just been offered a free lunch with a suspicious expiry date. "And how do you propose we do that, Captain? I left my violin and tear-jerking ballads back on Earth." Thorne gestured toward the console, a graveyard of failed diplomacy attempts. "We've got recordings of human emotions, movies, music, speeches." "It's worth a shot." Bardock seemed amused. "So, we're going to serenade our way to survival. That's new." "Desperate times," Thorne said with a shrug. "Cue up something emotional, Bardock. Let's see if we can make them cry before they make us bleed." Bardock fiddled with the controls, scrolling through a list of human emotional epics. "How about this?" he asked, as the opening strains of a particularly sappy love song filled the control node. "Perfect," Thorne said. "If that doesn't make them reconsider annihilating us, nothing will." As the music played, the rust bucket trembled, not just from the shoddy repairs but as if it too was moved by the melody. The Zithrax's signals showed signs of confusion, their fragmentation slowing if only slightly. "Think it's working?" Riggs asked, his voice a whisper in the dim room. "Either that or they're preparing a barrage," Bardock replied, fingers still dancing over the keys. "But hey, small victories." Thorne allowed herself a moment of hope, a rare and dangerous thing in her line of work. Keep it going. We've got their attention. Now let's make sure we don't lose it. As the song reached its crescendo, the console lit up with an incoming transmission from the Zithrax. The symbols danced across the screen, undecipherable but urgent. Translations busted, Bardock muttered. But they're definitely trying to say something. Well, let's hope it's not prepare to die, Thorn said, squinting at the screen. Riggs, any chance of piecing together a reply? Riggs looked dubious but gave it a shot, fingers flying over the keys. I can send something back, but who knows if they'll get the message or just think we're insulting their mothers. Do it, Thorn ordered. Let's see if they're up for chat rather than a shootout. Riggs sent the reply, a jumble of human emotion translated into code and flung out into the void. The crew waited, all eyes on the console, as if willing the Zithrax to respond in kind. The reply, when it came, was less a message and more a shift, a subtle change in the Zithrax's signals, like the universe pausing to take a breath. It was a start, at least, a glimmer of understanding in the chaos. Well, I'll be damned, Bardock said, rubbing his chin. Looks like they're not shooting yet. Call that progress, Thorn nodded, feeling the first stirrings of optimism. It was risky, like betting your last credit on a long shot, but it was all they had. Keep the music going. We'll drown them in our humanity if we have to. The diplomat watched them work, a mixture of relief and disbelief on his face. I didn't think you could actually, reach them. Thorn gave him a lopsided grin. We're human. We've got more tricks up our sleeves than just survival. Sometimes we actually surprise ourselves. The ship hummed with energy, the crew working in a rhythm born of necessity and desperation. It was a balancing act between hope and reality, the kind of dance that humans had perfected over millennia of near disasters. As they continued to send their makeshift transmissions, the Zithrax's signals slowly stabilized. It was like watching a storm calm, less a miracle and more a testament to human stubbornness. Riggs leaned back, letting out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. So, we're not dead yet, that's good. Always a plus, Thorn agreed. But let's not get too comfortable, we're just buying time. We still need to figure out how to get the diplomat out of here without ending up as alien toast. Bardock's fingers flew over the console, eyes darting between screens like a man possessed. If we can keep this up, maybe we can convince them to let us land without turning us into Swiss cheese. And if they don't? The diplomat asked, his voice tinged with a fear he couldn't quite hide. Well then, Thorn said with a fatalistic shrug, we'll do what we always do, improvise, adapt, and hope we're luckier than we are smart. The rust bucket groaned in agreement, its engines barely holding together under the strain. They were still a long way from safety, but for the first time there was a glimmer of possibility, a whisper of hope in the vast, uncaring void. Keep the lines open, Thorn instructed, her mind racing with possibilities. If this works, we might just pull off the impossible yet. As the crew set to work, Thorn allowed herself a moment to breathe. It was a fleeting respite, like finding a pocket of calm in the midst of a hurricane. But in their line of work, you took your victories where you could find them. So they waited, floating in the uncertain space between triumph and disaster, ready for whatever the universe decided to throw their way. And as the Zithrax's signals continued their tentative dance, Thorn couldn't help but feel a flicker of pride. After all, they were human, masters of chaos, survival, and sometimes, even against the odds, understanding. The rust bucket held together like a drifter's dreams, barely but somehow, as Thorn and her crew barreled towards the alien zoo on the verge of a nervous breakdown. The Zithrax signals, a chaotic mess of electronic squawks and blips, were slowly starting to resemble something less akin to a dying blender and more like a coherent thought. It was a start. Music seems to have calmed them down a bit, Riggs said, his voice dripping with the kind of amazement usually reserved for magic tricks and tax returns showing a refund. Who knew aliens were fans of human sap? Bardock chuckled, fingers still dancing across the console. Guess even intergalactic warlords have a soft spot for sappy love songs. Maybe we're not so different after all. Thorn leaned back in her chair, hands clasped behind her head. If I knew serenading aliens was all it took, I would have packed a karaoke machine instead of a plasma rifle. The diplomat, pale as a man who's realized his life hangs by a thread thinner than dental floss, cleared his throat. So, how do we proceed from here? I assume there's more to your plan than just a playlist of chart toppers, Thorn shrugged. Plan? That's a generous term for what we're doing, more like we're improvising with some emotional blackmail. Ah, the human specialty, Bardock added with a wry grin. Nothing says let's be friends like a ballad about lost love and regret. The console pinged with another series of blips. The Zithrax were still fragmented, but there was a hint of cohesion forming, a budding understanding, like two boxers deciding to hug it out instead of going for the knockout. Right then, Thorn said, getting to her feet with the grace of a cat that had been run over but was still alive. Diplomat, you're gonna help us with this next bit. The diplomat blinked like a deer caught in the headlights of an oncoming catastrophe. Me. But you're our best shot at making nice with these overgrown space iguanas, Thorn cut in, her voice firm. We need to send them a message they'll understand, and you're the closest thing we have to a professional talker. He swallowed hard, a bead of sweat making its way down his temple. All right. What do you need me to do? Bardock hit a few keys on the console, bringing up a screen filled with more alien gibberish than a conspiracy theory forum. We've got a basic understanding of their language protocols, but it's like trying to translate Shakespeare with a calculator. So, we need you to help us make something up, Riggs said, tossing a multitool from hand to hand like a juggler with a death wish. Something that'll tell them we're here to help, not harm. The diplomat looked at the screen, his expression one of a man who'd just been handed a bomb and asked to defuse it with a toothpick. I'll do my best, but this could take some time. Thorn smirked. Time is the one thing we don't have, so let's hustle. As the diplomat set to work, muttering to himself about syntax and semantics, Riggs sidled up to Thorn. You think this is gonna work? Thorn's smile was grim as a graveyard at midnight. I don't know, Riggs, but it's better than staring down a barrage of alien gunfire, right? Depends on your definition of better, Riggs replied with a sardonic grin. But yeah, I'd rather not be space dust today. The rust bucket shuddered around them, a groan echoing through its hull like the last breath of a dying beast. It was a reminder that their time was limited, a ticking clock in a game where the rules were made up and the points didn't matter. Keep those songs coming, Bardock, Thorn ordered, eyes scanning the console for any sign of impending doom. If we're lucky, we might just turn this into the galaxy's weirdest peace treaty. Bardock nodded, queuing up another track, a rousing anthem about hope and perseverance that seemed more out of place here than a suit at a beach party. But as the music played, the Zithrax's signals began to stabilize further, their chaotic energy slowly ebbing away. The diplomat worked feverishly, his fingers flying over the console as he constructed a message out of bits and pieces, a puzzle with half the pieces missing and the other half chewed up by the dog. Riggs watched, a bemused expression on his face. You know, if we pull this off, I'm gonna start carrying a boombox instead of a blaster. And if we don't? Thorn asked, arching an eyebrow. Well, then it won't matter much what we're carrying, will it? The ship continued its journey towards the zoo planet, the vast, swirling chaos of the Zithrax's civil war looming like a storm on the horizon. But with every passing moment the storm seemed to calm, the howling winds turning to whispers. Got it, the diplomat said finally, his voice tinged with both relief and exhaustion. I've put together a message. It's not perfect, but it might just do the trick. Thorn leaned over to inspect the diplomat's handiwork, a series of symbols and coded phrases that looked more like modern art than a diplomatic communique. Here's hoping they appreciate abstract expressionism. Sending it now, Bardock said, his finger hovering over the button like a gambler about to roll the dice. Cross your fingers, folks. The message shot out into the void, a beacon of hope or desperation, depending on your point of view, hurtling towards the Zithrax collective. The crew waited, breaths held as the seconds ticked by with the speed of glaciers. The response, when it came, was a surge of activity on the console, the Zithrax's signals rapidly shifting from chaos to coherence. It was like watching a jigsaw puzzle assemble itself, each piece slotting into place with a satisfying click. "Looks like they got the message," Riggs said, his voice a mix of shock and disbelief. "I can't believe it." Thorn let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Well, slap my ass and call me an optimist. We might just have a shot at this." The diplomat sagged in his chair, relief washing over him like a wave. "I don't know how we did it, but we actually reached them." Bardock let out a low, appreciative whistle. "Guess we're not completely useless after all." With the Zithrax's system stabilizing, the zoo planet came into view on their monitors, a sprawling complex of enclosures and habitats, a place meant for wonder now turned into a battleground. "All right, team," Thorn said, her voice firm with determination. "We're not out of the woods yet. We still need to get down there, find our guy, and get the hell out before they change their minds." "Piece of cake," Riggs muttered, his tone dry as desert sand. "Just another day in paradise." The rust bucket began its descent, the ship's creaks and groans a constant companion as they neared the surface. The Zithrax's signals continued to stabilize, their newfound coherence a fragile thing, like a truce made over a shared drink between enemies. As they approached the zoo's landing pad, Thorn couldn't help but marvel at the sight below, a riot of color and movement, the alien enclosures teeming with life. It was a stark contrast to the chaos they'd left behind, a reminder of what was at stake. "Touching down in 3, 2, 1, Bardock announced, the ship settling onto the pad with a jolt that rattled teeth and nerves alike. "All right, everyone," Thorn said, unbuckling her harness and rising to her feet. "Let's move. We've got a job to finish." The crew disembarked, stepping onto the landing pad with the practiced ease of veterans who'd seen more action than they cared to remember. The air was thick with tension, the kind that crackled like static before a storm. The diplomat led the way, his demeanor more confident now that they were on solid ground, or as solid as you could get on a planet embroiled in a civil war. "The Zithrax should be expecting us. Let's hope they roll out the welcome mat instead of the firing squad." "Here I thought I was the pessimist," Riggs said with a chuckle, his eyes scanning the surroundings for any sign of danger. Bardock fell into step beside him, his expression one of anticipation. "I'd rather be pleasantly surprised than dead." The zoo loomed before them, its gates open wide as if to welcome them, or perhaps swallow them whole. Thorn led the way, her senses alert to any hint of a trap. Inside, the enclosures were a wonderland of alien flora and fauna, each more bizarre and breathtaking than the last. It was a reminder that the universe, for all its darkness and danger, still held beauty beyond measure. "Focus, people," Thorn said, snapping her fingers to bring the crew back to the task at hand. "We didn't come here to gawk. Let's find our diplomat and get out of here before the Zithrax change their minds." The diplomat led them through the zoo, his knowledge of the layout proving invaluable as they navigated the maze of enclosures and pathways. The Zithrax, now hopefully more stable than before, were nowhere to be seen, their presence felt but not seen. Finally, they reached a heavily secured section of the zoo, the diplomat stopping before a reinforced gate. "He's in here." They kept him under heavy guard. "Then let's hope they are in a forgiving mood," Thorn muttered, motioning for Bardock to work his magic on the gate's controls. With a few deft keystrokes, the gate slid open, revealing a small chamber within. There, amidst the chaos and confusion, was their target, a haggard-looking man with the unmistakable air of someone who'd seen better days. The diplomat rushed forward, relief etched into every line of his face. "Sir, thank goodness you're all right." The man looked up, blinking as if waking from a long nightmare. "I can't believe you found me. How did you?" "Long story," Thorn cut in, helping him to his feet. "Let's just say we brought a mixtape and a lot of luck." With their mission finally nearing its end, The crew made their way back through the zoo, the diplomat and their rescued charge in tow. The Zithrax's signals continued to hold steady, their newfound stability a testament to the power of human stubbornness and a good soundtrack. As they reached the landing pad, Thorn couldn't help but feel a surge of pride. They'd done it, against the odds, against the chaos, they'd managed to pull it off. "All right, everyone," she said, a grin spreading across her face as they boarded the rust bucket once more. "Let's get the hell out of here before someone decides we're overstaying our welcome." The ship lifted off, carrying them away from the zoo planet and back into the vastness of space. The Zithrax's signals faded into the background, a distant echo of what had been. As the crew settled into their stations, Thorn allowed herself a moment of reflection. They hadn't just survived, they'd thrived, proving once again that humans, for all their flaws and failings, were capable of extraordinary things. "Not bad for a bunch of misfits," Riggs said, leaning back in his chair with a satisfied sigh. "Not bad at all," Thorn agreed, her voice filled with a rare note of warmth. "Now, let's see what else the universe has in store for us." With that, the rust bucket sailed on, a small speck in the vastness of the cosmos, driven by the indomitable spirit of its crew. A ragtag band of humans who'd face the darkness and come out the other side. The rust bucket rattled through space like a tin can strapped to a firework, carrying its motley crew away from the zoo planet and the chaos they'd left behind. Captain Thorn had seen better days. Hell, she'd seen better crews, but this was what she had, and it was hard to argue with results. Not that she wouldn't try if the opportunity arose. "Hard to believe we made it out," Riggs remarked, slouching in his chair as though the effort of staying upright was a personal affront. "Like waking up after a bender with all your teeth still in place. Or someone else's," Bardock quipped, still fiddling with the console. His multitool clattered against the metal with a sound that suggested everything was holding together by sheer willpower and a few prayers to gods no one believed in. Thorn tapped a finger against her lips, contemplating the view on the monitor where the zoo planet shrank into a distant marble. "Guess the Zithrax aren't all sharp teeth and bad temper. Who'd have thought? Not bad for a playlist and a lot of winging it, eh?" Bardock said, leaning back with a smirk that could have challenged the sun for brightness. "Who knew alien diplomacy was as easy as top 40 hits? A little less talk, a little more finesse," Riggs said. "I mean, we're basically space DJ now. Hope our rates are competitive," Thorn deadpanned. "I hear the pay's better than kidnapping." The diplomat, who'd finally managed to catch his breath and steady his nerves, regarded them with something approaching awe, or maybe just a resigned acceptance of his lot in life. "I still can't believe you did it. The Zithrax Collective stabilized, don't thank us too much. We might start charging by the compliment," Riggs replied, his tone so dry it could have sucked moisture from a swamp. The truth was, even in their most cynical moments, they'd done something remarkable. The Zithrax, a hive mind of epic proportions, had been on the brink of self-destruction. A little music and human grit had thrown them a lifeline. Now, they were left to pick up the pieces and keep the zoo running, a task that would require more patience than a saint and possibly more caffeine than the average human could stomach. So, Bardock began, his fingers dancing over the console as if it were an old friend. "What's the plan now, fearless leader?" Thorn shrugged, her expression as inscrutable as a politician's promise. "Get paid, get drunk, get gone, not necessarily in that order," Riggs added. The diplomat shifted uneasily, his eyes flitting between them as if expecting an ambush of wit and sarcasm at any moment. "About the zoo, it was meant to be a symbol of cooperation. Now it's a symbol of chaos," Thorn cut in. "Seems fitting, considering the universe's natural state, or a testament to human ingenuity," Bardock suggested, with a wink that could have melted an asteroid. "We bring a whole new meaning to hands-on diplomacy." The diplomat managed a weak laugh, though it felt more like an obligatory response than genuine amusement. "At least the Zithrax have their collective back together. Maybe they'll manage to keep the zoo running, or blow it all to hell again," Riggs said, ever the optimist. Either way, not our problem anymore, Thorn replied, her tone breezy, like someone tossing a grenade over their shoulder. We did our bit. Now it's time for them to play nice or implode. Given the choice, I'd bet on implode, Bardock said, as he adjusted their course, the stars streaking past like cosmic graffiti. The Rust Bucket was no luxury liner. It wasn't even a middle-class sedan. It was the kind of ship you took when the only alternative was walking through the vacuum of space, and even then, it was a close call. But it was theirs, and it had carried them through more scrapes than they could count. So what do you think the Zithrax'll do? Riggs asked, more to break the silence than out of real curiosity. Probably argue about who gets the last word, Thorn replied. Their kind always does, which is funny, considering they are a hive mind, Bardock pointed out. Imagine arguing with yourself and losing. Sounds like my last relationship, Riggs said, with a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. The diplomat, perhaps feeling braver now that they were a safe distance away, ventured. What about the zoo's purpose as a place of learning and understanding? The crew exchanged looks, the kind that spoke volumes without a single word. Understanding, huh? Thorn said, her voice laced with skepticism. I'd settle for not getting shot at for a while. If the Zithrax want to learn, they'll have plenty of time now, Bardock agreed. Maybe they'll even figure out why we're so damned hard to kill. Stubbornness and spite, Riggs said, counting off on his fingers. And maybe a talent for bad decisions. Can't argue with success, Thorn said, leaning back in her chair, which creaked ominously but held. There was a moment of silence as they each pondered what lay ahead, not just for them but for the Zithrax and their precious zoo. It was a thing of beauty, no doubt, but beauty was fragile, and in this universe, fragile things had a way of ending up broken. I think they'll manage, the diplomat said quietly, his voice almost lost in the hum of the engines. The Zithrax, I mean. They've got potential. Potential's just a fancy word for not there yet, Bardock said, his eyes on the console where the Zithrax's signals had once been a chaotic mess of colors and noise. Now they were a distant, coherent whisper, proof that even the most unruly of minds could find order if only for a moment. Here's hoping they use it for something good, Thorn said, more to herself than anyone else. If not, well, we're just a call away. And a paycheck, Riggs added. Always the paycheck, Thorn agreed, a small grin tugging at the corner of her mouth. After all, someone's got to keep the lights on. The Rust Bucket sailed on, a small, stubborn speck in the vastness of space, driven by the indomitable spirit of its crew. A ragtag band of humans who'd faced the darkness, thrown a few punches, and lived to tell the tale. Hey, Riggs, Bardock said, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled over them like a well-worn blanket. Think you'll bring that boombox next time, Riggs chuckled, a sound that seemed to shake the tension from his shoulders. Maybe. Depends if we ever get tired of improvising. Improv's half the fun, Thorn said, her gaze fixed on the stars. The other half's getting out alive. Alive and with a story to tell, Bardock said, his voice a mix of satisfaction and something else, a kind of camaraderie that had been forged through shared danger and averted disasters. And a little richer, Riggs added, never one to miss a chance to bring things back to basics. They had done something extraordinary, even if it was accidental and a little ridiculous. Maybe the Zithrax would find peace, maybe they'd continue to be the galaxy's most eccentric zookeepers. But whatever happened, Thorn knew they'd made a difference, even if the universe refused to acknowledge it. So, Bardock said, leaning back with an air of satisfaction. What do we do now? Same thing we always do, Thorn replied, her voice firm and confident, a leader in every sense of the word. Keep flying, keep surviving, and maybe, just maybe, do something good along the way. Riggs grinned, a wide, genuine smile that creased the corners of his eyes. Sounds like a plan. I'll drink to that, and I'll hold you to it, Bardock said, his eyes twinkling with mischief. Here's to the Rust Bucket, and to whatever comes next, Thorn said, raising an imaginary glass in a salute to the ship and its crew. A team of misfits who'd managed to save the day, one sappy love song at a time. As the vastness of space stretched out before them, the crew of the Rust Bucket settled into a comfortable silence, their thoughts as boundless as the stars. For now, they'd continue their journey ever onward, chasing the next adventure with a kind of reckless abandon that only the truly courageous or truly foolish could muster. And who knew? Maybe someday they'd figure out which one they were. Until then, they had their ship, their music, and each other, and that was more than enough. The universe was a big, messy place, full of chaos and uncertainty. But for Captain Thorne and her crew, it was home. And in the end, that was all that really mattered.